He was too beautiful to be human. That was what the bidders whispered the moment the wagon stopped and the tarp slid back, revealing the slave man they'd come to gawk at like a miracle and a sin. Not a boy, not a brute hauled in irons to prove he couldn't run. A man, standing calm in a clean linen shirt that didn't belong to him, wrists bare, head high, as if the courthouse steps were a stage he'd chosen. Sunlight found his face and made the crowd go quiet in the strangest way, as if even the cruelest mouths remembered manners for a heartbeat. His skin was a smooth, warm brown that looked almost lit from inside. His hair lay in soft black waves that a barber must have cut that morning. His mouth wasn't smiling, but it carried the shape of someone who'd learned to make other people think he might. Most enslaved people were made invisible until they were needed. This one was made to be seen. "You can't buy a storm," someone muttered behind a fan. "You can buy anything," someone else answered, too quick, too hungry. The auctioneer, red-faced, sweating through his collar, lifted his hands like a preacher. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called, "I have a special lot today. A house train man, a valet, a personal attendant, excellent manners, strong back, gentle hands, gentle hands." The phrase rippled through the women like a coin dropped in a church plate. The man on the steps didn't blink. His gaze slid across faces the way a blade slid across silk, silent, measured, leaving no mark anyone could prove. And then his eyes paused on the only person not craning forward. A widow in black stood at the edge of the crowd, her veil pinned low. She held her gloves in one hand and a folded paper in the other, as if she'd come for a debt, not a spectacle. She didn't look at his beauty first. She looked at his throat, right where a faint pale scar kissed the skin, thin as a ring. The widow's fingers tightened on the paper. Her mouth didn't move, but something behind her veil shifted. Recognition, or fear, or both. The auctioneer barked, "Who'll start me at 800? A laugh, then another. 800 was a number for a prize stallion, for a new gin machine, for land. Not for a man, but that was the point. The word man hung in the air, awkward and dangerous. They preferred boy for men twice their age. They preferred girl for women with children. They preferred anything that kept the truth from growing teeth. A planter with a gold watch lifted his cane. 800! A woman in pearl earrings raised her fan like a flag. 9! A thin man with ink-stained fingers called 1,000, and the crowd turned, surprised a clerk would dare. The widow in black did not speak. The man on the steps watched the bidding climb like a fire crawling up a drape. He did not flinch at the numbers, because numbers had never been his enemy. People were. The auctioneer's voice rose, savoring the swell. 1,100. 12. 13. The widow stepped forward at last, slow enough to look reluctant, fast enough to look inevitable. 2,000, she said, clear as a bell. The entire square seemed to inhale at once. 2,000 for one man, in a county where most folks wouldn't spend $2 on a doctor. The gold watch planter's smile cracked. "That's foolishness, Mrs. Calloway." The widow didn't glance at him. "Then don't compete." The auctioneer's eyes went bright. 2,000. Do I hear 21? The planter snapped, face flushing, pride wounded. The widow lifted her paper. 3,000. A murmur rose, scandal dressed as concern. Her husband's been dead barely a year. She's spending like she's trying to bury something. She's buying a man like he's a piece of jewelry. The auctioneer's gavel hovered. 3,000 going once. The man on the steps finally moved. Not much. Just enough to turn his head toward the widow, and in the small gap between veil and cheek, she saw his mouth shape a word without sound. No. Or maybe it was, don't. Her jaw tightened. She did not lower her bid. 3,000 going twice. The planter hesitated, calculating. He could afford it. He couldn't afford to lose. 31, he spat. The widow's voice did not change. 4,000. That did it. Laughter burst. Sharp, mean, nervous. 4,000 for a pretty servant? Lord! The auctioneer slammed the gavel before anyone could regain sense. Sold to Mrs. Lenora Calloway. A cheer rose from people who were not the ones being sold. The man stood still as the noise hit him, as if he'd expected it all along. Then the auctioneer leaned close to the widow, eyes greedy. A fine purchase, he murmured. You won't regret it. Under her veil, Lenora Calloway whispered, so low only the man on the steps could hear. I'm not buying you, she said. I'm retrieving what was stolen. His lashes lowered for the first time. A slow blink, a curtain falling. And in that instant, the crowd's rumor, too beautiful to be human, twisted into something colder, because the man's expression wasn't gratitude, it was pity. As the chain was finally brought out, because no matter how pretty the package, the law demanded its ribbon. Lenora felt her paper tremble between her fingers. She forced herself to look down at it again. A list, copied in a careful hand. Names, dates, a seal. And one line she couldn't stop reading, even as the square blurred around her. A male child, born free, unlawfully conveyed. She had spent the last year of her mourning tearing through her dead husband's locked drawers, his hidden account books, his coded letters. She had found whispers of a transaction that did not involve cotton or land. A transaction that involved a person. The slave man in Georgia. That phrase appeared in more than one letter, always followed by a smear of ink, as if the writer's hand had shaken. And every time she traced those words, she felt the same sick certainty. My husband didn't just die. He was destroyed by the secret of that man. Now the man was hers by law, and that, Lenora feared, was exactly how the secret wanted it. The wagon ride back to Calloway House was too quiet. Lenora sat inside, stiff-backed, while the man rode on the rear plank, hands bound loosely, not because he needed it, but because the driver needed to believe it. The driver, a thick-necked fellow named Wirt, kept glancing over his shoulder as if the man might vanish into smoke. Don't look at him too long, Wirt muttered to Lenora through the window, spitting into the dust. Folks say he puts thoughts in your head. Lenora's stomach tightened. Thoughts don't frighten me. Wirt laughed, but it came out wrong. That's what they all say. The man on the rear plank leaned forward just enough that Lenora could see his reflection in the glass. Calm face, steady eyes, that faint pale scar at his throat like a signature. You don't have to be afraid of thoughts, he said, voice quiet. Only what people do to avoid them. Lenora's breath caught. Enslaved men were trained, beaten, into silence around white women, especially widows with reputations to protect. If they spoke, it was, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, and apologies. This man spoke like he'd been waiting. Lenora forced herself to keep her voice steady. What is your name? He hesitated a heartbeat too long. They call me Jonah. They call you, Lenora repeated. What do you call yourself? A faint smile, almost nothing. That depends who's asking. I am, Lenora said, sharper than she intended, and I paid $4,000 to ask. His eyes met the reflection of hers. Then you paid to hear a lie. Lenora's fingers curled into her lap. Why? Because the truth is dangerous, Jonah said. And you don't look like a woman who enjoys danger. That struck her like an insult, dressed as observation. She thought of the nights she'd sat with her husband's body, cooling in the upstairs room, listening to the house settle, as if it was relieved. She thought of the sealed letter she'd found under the false bottom of his desk, addressed to a man in Savannah, marked urgent and never sent. She thought of the line that had turned her grief into a hunt. If Lenora learns what he is, she will not forgive any of us. You don't know what I enjoy, Lenora said. Jonah's gaze drifted to the paper in her hands. I know what you're holding. Lenora's blood went cold. You can read. Jonah's lips didn't move into a smile, but his eyes did. I can understand. That's not an answer. It's the safest one, he said. The wagon wheels hit a rut. Lenora bit her tongue and stared forward, jaw clenched, as Calloway House rose ahead. White columns, green shutters, the kind of home built to look like virtue. It had always looked like a promise. Now it looked like a mouth. Inside, the household had been arranged like theater. Lenora's elderly aunt, Miss Agatha, stood in the entry in stiff lace, face set in its usual expression of disapproval. Two housemaids hovered behind her, eyes down. Wirt jumped down and yanked Jonah's arm as if to prove ownership. Jonah stepped off the plank smoothly, landing like a dancer, and for a split second, every head lifted despite themselves. Agatha's mouth thinned. "Lenora," she said, and the word carried warning. "Tell me you didn't." Lenora removed her veil. "I did." Agatha's gaze flicked over Jonah like she was inspecting a stain. "You bought trouble." Lenora kept her face blank. "I bought a servant." Agatha's laugh was quiet and cutting. "Servant? Nah, that's not what they call him." Jonah's eyes slid toward Agatha. He gave a small nod, polite enough to be dangerous. "Miss," he said. Agatha stiffened like she'd been touched. "Don't speak to me." Jonah lowered his gaze. "As you wish." But Lenora saw his hands, still bound loosely, and realized something that made her stomach twist. He had not been forced into obedience. He had learned to wear it when it suited him. Lenora turned to Wirt. "Take him to the washroom. Remove those ropes. Give him a room in the back hall." Agatha snapped. "Lenora!" Lenora did not look at her. "Now." Wirt hesitated, then nodded, relieved to have orders. He tugged Jonah toward the corridor. As Jonah passed Lenora, his shoulder brushed close enough that his breath warmed her ear. "You shouldn't keep me in your house," he murmured. Lenora didn't move. "You shouldn't have let yourself be sold." His voice barely changed. "No one lets a cage happen. They just learn where the bars are." Then he was gone down the hall, and Lenora stood in her bright entryway, with her aunt's fury pressing in and a new unsettling thought blooming behind her ribs. If Jonah can see bars I can't, then I've been living in a cage I call comfort. That night Lenora did not sleep. The house was too full of sounds, floorboards popping, distant murmurs from the quarters, the tick of the hallway clock like a judge tapping a gavel. In the dark, Lenora unfolded the paper again by lamplight. The list was copied from courthouse records in Savannah, smuggled to her by an old friend of her husband's who had refused to meet her in public. He'd handed it over with shaking hands and said only, "If you pull this thread, you'll unravel people who don't bleed easily." Names, dates, seals, and one name that made Lenora's throat ache: Elijah Calloway, her husband's younger brother. Dead at 9 years old, the family had always said. Lost to fever, buried in the family plot. But in her husband's letters, Elijah's name appeared again and again, not with grief, but with terror. It made no sense. Unless Elijah had not died, unless Elijah had been moved. Lenora's candle guttered. Shadows swam on the walls like they had opinions. She closed the paper and stared into the dark. From somewhere down the hall came a soft sound, too delicate to be an accident. A single note, not sung, hummed, low, controlled, like someone testing a string on an instrument. Lenora sat up, heart hammering. She listened. The note came again, then another, forming a small, strange pattern. Beautiful, in a way that made her skin prickle, because it didn't belong in her house at midnight. She slipped from bed, pulled on a robe, and opened her door. The hall was dark, but the moon through the windows painted pale strips across the floor. The sound drifted from the back corridor where she'd placed Jonah. Lenora moved quietly, bare feet cold on the wood. The humming stopped at the moment she reached the corner. Silence. Then Jonah's voice, calm as if he'd been expecting her. "Mrs. Calloway," he said from the darkness, "you should go back to bed." Lenora's breath caught. "Were you humming?" A pause. "Yes. Why?" "So the house remembers it has ears," he said. Lenora stared into the dim shape of him, sitting on a narrow bed in a servant's room, back straight, hands folded. He looked less like a prisoner than a man waiting for a meeting. "Are you warning me?" Lenora asked. Jonah tilted his head. "I'm telling you the truth in a way your walls can understand." Lenora's pulse thudded. "What truth?" Jonah's gaze lifted to hers, and in the moonlight his eyes looked almost golden. "The dark secret of a slave man in Georgia," he said softly, and the words sounded like he was tasting them. "That's what you paid for, isn't it?" Lenora's throat tightened. "I paid to understand why my husband died," Jonah finished gently. "Or why he begged you not to open his drawers." Lenora froze. Jonah watched her face as if reading a page. "You didn't know," he murmured. Lenora's voice came out thin. "What are you?" Jonah's mouth curved, not with humor but with sadness. "A problem they tried to bury." Lenora stepped closer. "My husband wrote about a slave man. He feared what I know," Jonah said, "and what I am allowed to say." Lenora's hands shook. "Allowed? By whom?" Jonah leaned forward slightly, the moon catching the pale scar at his throat. "By the people who put this here," he said, "so I would remember the cost of speaking." Lenora's stomach turned. "They cut you." Jonah's expression didn't change. "They taught me." Lenora swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay steady. "Tell me." Jonah studied her for a long moment, and Lenora realized something chilling. He was deciding whether she would live through the truth. "At dawn," Jonah said at last, "go to your husband's grave." Lenora's brow furrowed. "Why?" Jonah's eyes narrowed, the first hint of steel. "Because your husband didn't take the secret with him." Lenora's mouth went dry. "What did he do with it?" Jonah's voice dropped. "He buried it where he thought no one would look twice." Lenora stared. "You mean in the grave?" Jonah's gaze flicked to the hall, as if listening to the house itself. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. Lenora listened. At first only the clock, then, so faint she might have imagined it, a soft scuff, like fabric moving. Downstairs. Lenora's blood turned to ice. Someone was in the house. Jonah rose in one smooth motion, silent as a shadow. He stepped past Lenora, closer to the door, positioning himself between her and the hall like it was instinct. "How did you know?" Lenora breathed. Jonah did not look at her. "Because people don't let me be alone," he murmured. "Not when I'm under a new roof." Lenora's heart hammered. "What do we do?" Jonah's voice was calm. "You go back to bed." Lenora stared at him, incredulous. "Someone's here." Jonah's eyes cut to hers. "And if you come out swinging, they'll say you imagined it," he said quietly. "They'll say a grieving widow sees ghosts. They'll lock you up with kindness." Lenora's skin prickled at the certainty in his tone. "You've seen it," she whispered. Jonah's jaw tightened. "I've been the reason it happens." Lenora's mouth went dry. "What did you do?" Jonah's gaze flicked down, then back up. "Survived," he said. "And people hate a survivor who remembers their names." The sound downstairs came again. Closer now, a floorboard protesting. Lenora's breath turned shallow. "Aunt Agatha!" Jonah shook his head slightly. "Not her." Lenora's eyes widened. "How do you—" Jonah's voice was almost tender. "Because Agatha walks like she wants the world to apologize," he whispered. "This one walks like he wants to disappear." "A man, then?" "Not a clumsy thief." "A purpose." Lenora forced herself to step back. "If I go back to bed, you will act like you know nothing," Jonah said. "And in the morning you will do what I told you." Lenora stared at him in the moonlight, at the beauty everyone had paid to look at, and felt something like anger flare under her fear. "You're giving orders," she said, voice shaking. Jonah's gaze held hers. "No," he said. "I'm offering you the first choice you've had since you married Elijah's brother." Lenora's stomach clenched at the name. "Say his name again," she whispered. Jonah's eyes narrowed. "You don't even know you said it," he murmured, more to himself than to her. Then firmer, "Go." Lenora backed into the hall, heart pounding. She returned to her room, closed the door softly, and sat on the edge of her bed in the dark, listening. Her candle was out. The house was a black throat. She heard the faintest sound, fabric brushing wood, a breath held, then a whisper, so soft it might have been the clock. "Leave it!" And then silence. When dawn came, Lenora was already dressed. She didn't wake Agatha. She didn't call the maids. She slipped out with a small spade and a lantern, moving across the dew-wet grass toward the family plot behind the live oaks. Old trees that had watched too much and learned to keep quiet. Her husband's grave sat fresh compared to the others, the soil still darker. Lenora knelt, lantern shaking in her hand. She told herself she was only checking, only being foolish. She put the spade into the ground. The earth gave too easily. Her breath hitched. She dug faster, hands blistering. 6 inches down, the spade hit something hard. Wood. Lenora's blood went cold. Her husband had not been buried shallow. The coffin was deeper. This was something else. She scraped away dirt until a small box emerged, wrapped in oilcloth, sealed with wax. Lenora's fingers trembled as she pried it open. Inside, letters, a small folded cloth, a thin chain, and a miniature portrait, painted carefully, lovingly, of a boy with dark hair and eyes that looked startlingly like Jonah's. Lenora's breath caught, her throat tightened so hard she couldn't swallow. She unfolded the cloth. It was a baby's cap, stitched with tiny initials. E. C. Elijah Calloway. Lenora's hand shook as she grabbed the letters. The top one was addressed to her, in her husband's hand. She tore it open. "Lenora, if you are reading this, then I'm gone, and you have done what I begged you not to do. I am sorry. I did not marry you to ruin you. I married you because you were kind, and I thought kindness could drown a secret. It cannot. Secrets learn to swim. The man they call Jonah is not what they claim. He is not property by any law that matters. He is a Calloway, my brother, not dead, not buried, sold, because our mother could not bear the shame of him being alive." Lenora's vision blurred. Her stomach lurched. She read on, desperate. They took him as a child. They hid him, then passed him from house to house like a cursed mirror. Always close enough to our family to keep him under control. Always far enough that he could not claim us. They made him beautiful on purpose. They taught him music, manners, languages, so he would be useful in the parlors where women gossip and men confess. They called him slave man, like it was a joke. It is not a joke. It is a leash made of silk. If he ever speaks his true name, the people who did this will burn everything to stop him. Our house, your reputation, your life. But if he never speaks it, he will die in a cage that looks like comfort. I tried to free him quietly. I tried to buy his papers back. I tried to undo what was done without shaming my mother. I failed. And now, they will come for you if you get close. I am sorry. I am so sorry. Do not trust anyone who claims to have loved me. Trust only the truth. E.C. Lenora's breath came out as a sob she didn't recognize as her own. She stared at the portrait again, at the boy who had been erased. Then she looked up as if she might see Jonah standing among the trees, watching. He wasn't there. But Lenora felt with sick clarity that she was no longer alone in her grief. She was now in the middle of a war her husband had died trying to avoid. When Lenora returned to the house, she found the back corridor empty. Jonah's room was neat, blanket folded, no sign he had slept, but on the bare mattress lay one thing, a strip of paper torn from something larger. On it, in a careful hand, was written a single line. You dug where they never wanted you to kneel. Lenora's fingers clenched the note until her knuckles turned white. She moved fast then, storming into her husband's study, pulling open drawers, yanking out books, searching for anything else he'd hidden. Agatha's voice cut through the hall like a whip. "Lenora! What are you doing? Lenora turned, holding the letter. Did you know? She demanded, voice shaking. Agatha's face went tight. Know what? Lenora's throat burned. That Elijah didn't die. That he was sold. Agatha's eyes flickered, just once, toward the back corridor. That was answer enough. Lenora stepped closer, fury rising like heat. You let them! Agatha's mouth trembled, then hardened. It was necessary. Necessary? Lenora spat. For what? For pride? For survival, Agatha snapped. And for the first time her composure cracked, revealing something raw under the lace. Do you think this family would stand if people knew what our mother did? Do you think you would be safe if men believed a Calloway boy had mixed blood? The word didn't need to be said. It hung there, ugly and sharp. Lenora's hands shook. So you erased him. Agatha's eyes flashed. We protected the name. Lenora's voice was low, trembling. You murdered a child's life to protect a name. Agatha stepped closer, eyes cold now. And you will do the same if you wish to stay alive, she hissed, because the men who arranged it are not sentimental. They will not spare you because you're a widow. Lenora's stomach twisted. Men, Agatha's jaw clenched. Do not pretend ignorance. Your husband danced with them for years. Lenora flinched, pain flashing. He tried to stop it, Agatha scoffed. He tried to soothe it. And that is why he is in the ground. Lenora's heart pounded. Who are they? Agatha stared at her, and Lenora saw something like fear flicker behind her eyes. Fear older than Lenora. Fear that had shaped the household like architecture. Agatha's voice dropped. A circle, she said. Respectable men, judges, sheriffs, bankers, ministers who preach God and practice commerce, men who know how to make papers say whatever they need. Lenora's throat went dry. And Jonah? Elijah? Agatha's eyes narrowed. He is the key to a scandal that would destroy them. He is proof. Lenora swallowed hard. Then why keep him alive? Agatha's mouth twisted. Because he is useful, she said bitterly. He is bait. He is a warning. He is entertainment for those who like their sins dressed pretty. Lenora's skin crawled. The implication was clear without being spoken in detail. Jonah's body, Jonah's presence, had been used as a luxury object for powerful people. Lenora's stomach heaved. Where is he? She demanded. Agatha's gaze slid away. Gone, she said. And that is good, because if he stays, they will come. Lenora's eyes narrowed. They already did. Agatha froze. What? Lenora's voice shook. Someone was in the house last night. Agatha's face went pale. You're imagining. No, Lenora snapped. And Jonah knew. He told me what to do. He told me to dig. Agatha's mouth opened, then closed. Her fingers trembled on her lace. He told you, she whispered, and the words sounded like doom. Lenora leaned in. Why are you afraid of him? Agatha's eyes flicked toward the door as if expecting someone to step through. Because, she whispered, he remembers. Lenora's breath hitched. Then help me find him. Agatha's laugh was sharp, almost hysterical. Help you? Child, you don't understand. He isn't running away from you. He's running towards something. Lenora's stomach clenched. What? Agatha's voice dropped to a hiss. Revenge, she said. Not with a knife, with a scandal. Lenora's mind flashed to Jonah's calm face, his pity. What does he want? Lenora whispered. Agatha's eyes glistened, rage and fear tangled. He wants his name back, she said, and he'll burn hours to get it. Lenora stood very still, the letter heavy in her hand. Outside, the day was bright, birds singing as if the world was simple. Inside, the truth spread like ink in water. Dark, unstoppable. Then the front bell rang. A crisp, confident sound. Agatha stiffened. Lenora's breath caught. A servant hurried down the hall. Mrs. Calloway, the maid whispered, eyes wide. There's a gentleman at the door. He says he has business concerning your recent purchase. Agatha's face drained of color. No, she whispered. Lenora's heart slammed. Who is it? The maid swallowed. Sheriff Harlan, she said. And he brought 2 men with him. Agatha grabbed Lenora's arm, nails digging into her skin. Listen to me, she hissed. If you play this wrong, you will end up in a carriage with the windows locked, and no one will call it kidnapping. They will call it care. Lenora yanked her arm free. I will not be silenced in my own house. Agatha's eyes flashed. Then you will be silenced somewhere else. Lenora forced herself to breathe and walked to the entryway. Sheriff Harlan stood in the doorway, like he belonged there. Broad-shouldered, clean coat, friendly smile that didn't reach his eyes. 2 men lingered behind him, hands resting near their belts, as if expecting trouble. Mrs. Calloway, Harlan said warmly. My condolences again on your husband, a fine man, a community man. Lenora's stomach tightened. Sheriff. Harlan's gaze flicked over her, measuring. I heard you made a significant purchase yesterday. Lenora's face stayed blank. I bought a servant. Harlan chuckled softly. Folks are talking. $4,000 buys more than a servant. It buys attention. Lenora held his gaze. Is that why you're here? Harlan's smile thinned. I'm here to protect you, he said smoothly. There are concerns about the man you bought, his paperwork, his history. Lenora's pulse thudded. His paperwork was approved at auction. Harlan's eyes glinted. Paperwork can be misunderstood, he said. And that man has a way of creating misunderstanding. Lenora's jaw tightened. What do you want? Harlan stepped inside without being invited, his boots loud on the polished floor. We want to make sure you're safe, he said. That man is known to unsettle households. Agatha hovered behind Lenora like a warning shadow. Lenora forced her voice steady. Where's this coming from, Sheriff? Who sent you? Harlan's smile returned, gentle as a lullaby. Friends, he said. People who respect your family. People who respected your husband. Lenora's throat tightened. My husband tried to free him, she said, testing. Harlan's smile froze for a heartbeat. Then it softened again, dangerously. Your husband was sentimental, Harlan said. A good man, but soft in places that should have been hard. That softness cost him. Lenora's blood went cold. What did you just say? Harlan's eyes held hers, calm, confident. I'm saying grief can make a widow do foolish things, he said. And I don't want you to ruin your life because you bought a pretty problem. Lenora's hands trembled. His name is Jonah. Harlan's brows lifted slightly. Is it? He murmured. He's had many names. Lenora swallowed. I won't give him up. Harlan sighed as if disappointed. Mrs. Calloway, he said gently. That man does not belong in a respectable home. He belongs back with people who know how to handle him. Lenora's stomach turned. Handle him. Harlan's tone stayed smooth. He will be returned, he said, quietly, for your sake. Agatha's breath hitched behind her. Lenora felt something harden in her chest. A line crossed. No, Lenora said, voice low. Harlan's smile vanished. Excuse me? Lenora stepped forward, closer than was polite. You will leave my house, she said. And you will not take anyone. Harlan stared at her, then laughed softly, amused, almost tender. There it is, he murmured. The Calloway spine. Your husband liked that. Lenora's heart pounded. Where is Jonah? She demanded, sudden desperation cutting through her fury. Harlan's eyes gleamed. If he's smart, he said, he's already running. Lenora's blood went cold. Harlan leaned in, voice dropping so only she could hear. And if he's not, he whispered, we'll find him. Because we always do. Then louder, for the room. Mrs. Calloway, I advise you to cooperate. People are watching. Lenora's breath came shallow. And then, soft as a sigh, music drifted in from outside, a violin. Not from the quarters, not from town. From the road. A slow, beautiful phrase that made the hair on Lenora's arms rise, because she recognized it without knowing how. Like a melody she'd heard in a dream. Sheriff Harlan's face tightened. Agatha's eyes widened, fear naked now. Lenora's heart slammed against her ribs. Harlan turned sharply toward the open doorway, scanning the yard. The two men behind him shifted, uneasy. The violin continued, steady, calm, as if whoever played it knew exactly what it did to the air. Lenora stepped closer to the threshold, squinting into the bright morning. Across the yard, near the main gate, a figure stood in the sun. Jonah. He held a violin under his chin as if it belonged there, bow moving with effortless control. He was not running. He was performing. For the sheriff. For the house. For anyone watching from behind curtains. And as Jonah played, he looked directly at Lenora, his gaze steady, his mouth shaping words without sound again. This time, Lenora understood. Watch. The violin phrase shifted. Still beautiful, but the pattern turned strange, unsettling, like a hymn that had learned a different god. Sheriff Harlan's jaw clenched. "What is he doing?" he snapped. Agatha's voice shook. "He shouldn't," she whispered. "He promised." Harlan barked at his men. "Get him!" The two men strode toward the yard. Jonah didn't move. He kept playing. And then, as the men approached, Jonah lifted the bow slightly and let the note hang. Pure, high, almost tender. Then he stopped. Silence snapped into place. Jonah lowered the violin and spoke, not loudly but clearly enough to carry. "Sheriff Harlan," he called. Harlan froze. Jonah's voice was calm, almost polite. "Do you still dream about the river?" The sheriff's face went rigid. Lenora's breath caught. Harlan's voice came out sharp. "What did you say?" Jonah tilted his head slightly, the picture of innocence. "The river," he repeated. "Where the papers got wet, where the ink bled, where you told a boy he'd drown if he spoke his name." Agatha's hand flew to her mouth. Lenora's stomach dropped. Harlan's eyes went cold. "Shut your mouth!" Jonah's expression didn't change. "You can't buy silence from a man you didn't legally own," he said softly. "You can only threaten, and threats are loud." Harlan took a step forward, fury vibrating in his shoulders. "You don't belong here." Jonah's gaze slid to Lenora, then back. "Neither do you," he said. Harlan's voice rose. "You are property." Jonah cut in, still calm. "Say my name," he said. The yard went still. Harlan's jaw tightened. "I don't know your name." Jonah smiled then, small, sharp. "That's the dark secret," he said, voice carrying. "You do." Lenora's chest tightened. She felt the world narrowing to this moment. Jonah lifted his chin slightly, exposing that faint scar at his throat like a challenge. "My name is Elijah Calloway," he said, clear as a bell, "and I was born free." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the yard erupted. Gasps, whispers, a sound like a wasp nest stirred. Harlan's face twisted with rage and something else. Fear. Agatha swayed, as if the truth had struck her physically. Lenora's mouth went dry. Jonah, Elijah, kept his gaze steady, voice unwavering. "You sold me," he said, looking at Harlan. "You kept me close enough to watch, far enough to deny. You dressed me up and passed me around like a story men tell each other after church." Lenora's stomach turned, sick with what that implied. Jonah's voice stayed controlled, but Lenora heard something deeper underneath. Years of swallowed words. "And you called me slave man. Like it made you innocent," Jonah continued. "Like it made me less than human." Harlan lunged forward. "Seize him!" The two men grabbed Jonah's arms. Jonah didn't fight. He simply turned his face toward Lenora, eyes steady. Lenora's heart hammered. "Mrs. Calloway," Jonah said, voice calm even as hands clamped him. "You wanted the truth. Now decide what kind of woman you are." Lenora froze. Harlan's eyes flashed to her, sharp. "Lenora," he warned, dropping all pretense. "Don't be a fool." Lenora's mind raced. She saw her husband's letter in her memory, the portrait, the baby cap, the truth buried in the grave. She saw Jonah's face, too beautiful to be human, only because the world had tried to turn him into an object, and he had refused to become one in his soul. She saw the sheriff's men tightening their grip, as if squeezing could erase a name. Lenora's hands clenched. "No," she said, voice trembling but loud enough. Harlan's head snapped toward her. "What?" Lenora stepped forward into the yard, sunlight hitting her like a verdict. "Release him," she ordered. Harlan's face went dark. "You don't understand what you're doing." Lenora's voice shook, but it didn't break. "I understand you came to steal a man under the cover of law," she said. "I understand my husband died because of this. I understand you think you can frighten me into silence." Harlan's nostrils flared. "You will regret this." Lenora's gaze locked on him. "Then you admit you have the power to make me regret," she said, voice cutting. "Which means you're not a protector. You're a threat." Harlan's jaw clenched. Lenora turned to the two men holding Jonah. "Let him go," she said again. The men hesitated, glancing at Harlan. Jonah's eyes stayed on Lenora, steady as a compass. Then, from the edge of the yard, one of the housemaids, young, trembling, spoke up, voice barely audible. "He told the truth," she whispered, eyes wide. "I heard him sing it last night." Agatha snapped, "Silence!" The maid flinched, but she didn't take it back. Lenora felt the ground shift beneath the sheriff's feet. Truth once spoken didn't stay in one mouth. Harlan's smile returned, but it was thin and cruel. "Mrs. Calloway," he said softly, "if you insist on protecting him, then you will share his consequences." Lenora swallowed hard. "Then I will," she said. For a second, Jonah's expression flickered, something like surprise quickly buried. Then Harlan's face hardened. He leaned toward his men. "Take him," he snapped. "And if the widow follows, take her too." Lenora's breath caught. The two men jerked Jonah forward. Jonah let himself be pulled, but as he moved, his hand flicked. Fast, subtle, and something small slipped from his sleeve to the ground near Lenora's foot, a folded scrap of paper. Lenora's heart slammed. She kept her face still as she bent slightly, letting the hem of her dress hide her fingers as she scooped it up. Harlan turned away, satisfied, already imagining victory. Jonah was dragged toward the road. Lenora stood in the bright yard, forced to keep her posture calm as panic screamed under her ribs. She waited until the sheriff's men were far enough that she could unfold the scrap without being seen. 3 words written in the same careful hand as before. "Go to Savannah." Lenora's throat tightened. Savannah meant courts, records, ships, escape, or ruin. Savannah meant the place where papers could make a free man in ink, even if the world refused him in flesh. Lenora looked up just in time to see Jonah glance back once as he was forced down the road. Not pleading, not begging, expecting. As if he had set something in motion that could no longer be stopped. And Lenora realized, with a cold clarity that made her knees weak. The dark secret wasn't only that Jonah was a Calloway, born free and sold anyway. The dark secret was that the people who had done it were so powerful, so practiced at bending reality, that the only way to fight them was to drag the truth into sunlight until it burned everyone, victims and villains alike. Jonah wasn't running from danger. He was leading it. Lenora went inside like a woman who had accepted her role. She let Agatha fuss and scold. She let the servants avoid her eyes. She let the house return to its normal hum. Then, just before noon, she went upstairs, packed a small trunk, and pulled out her husband's sealed letter from the hidden box she'd unearthed. She added the portrait, the baby cap, the chain, and finally, she took her husband's pistol from the drawer. Not to use for spectacle, not to play at bravery, but because in Georgia, a woman traveling alone with truth in her luggage needed something the law pretended not to see. Agatha caught her at the stairs, eyes wild. "Where do you think you're going?" Lenora met her gaze. "To Savannah." Agatha's face twisted. "You'll die." Lenora's voice was steady. "Then at least I'll die knowing I didn't help you bury a living man." Agatha's mouth trembled. "You think he's grateful?" she whispered, suddenly raw. "You think he'll spare us?" Lenora's throat tightened. He owes us nothing, she said. That's the point. Agatha reached for her arm. Lenora stepped back. If you truly fear scandal, she said quietly, then you should fear the kind that comes from forcing beauty into chains. Agatha's hand fell. Lenora walked out of Calloway House with her trunk and a driver she trusted more than most men in town, an older black coachman named Moses, who had served her husband and watched his eyes darken over the last year. Moses didn't ask questions. He only said softly as he lifted the trunk, "Is it about the man they took?" Lenora swallowed. "Yes." Moses nodded once, jaw tight. "Then we go fast." The road to Savannah was long enough for fear to become a companion. They passed pine barrens, small farms, churches like white teeth in green fields. Every mile, Lenora expected to see the sheriff's men. At a crossroads store, they stopped for water. A man sitting on a barrel stared at Lenora too long. "Widow Calloway," he called, voice lazy. "Heard you bought yourself a pretty servant." "Heard he got returned. Shame." Lenora kept her face blank. "Rumors travel faster than wagons," she said. The man grinned. "Rumors got legs," he said. "Just like folks." Lenora's stomach tightened. Moses leaned in, voice low. "We should not linger." Lenora nodded. They left before the man could say more, but Lenora felt eyes on her back like hands. By dusk, Savannah's skyline rose, masts, chimneys, the smell of river mud and commerce. The city felt like a different beast than the countryside, louder, sharper, more practiced at hiding sins in plain sight. Lenora went straight to the address her husband's friend had whispered to her months ago, the one he'd said was safe, if any place could be. A narrow building behind a print shop, a door with no sign. Lenora knocked. A slot slid open. An eye looked out. "Who sent you?" a voice demanded. Lenora's throat tightened. "Elijah Calloway," she said, forcing the name steady. Silence. Then the door opened fast and a man pulled her inside. He was thin, hair gray, hands ink-stained. He stared at Lenora like she was a ghost. "He said it?" he whispered. Lenora nodded, breath shallow. "They took him," she said. "Sheriff Harlan—" The man flinched. "Of course." Lenora pulled out the items from her trunk, portrait, cap, letter, placing them on the table like evidence. The man's eyes went wet as he looked at the baby cap. "My God," he whispered. "It's true." Lenora's voice shook. "Where did they take him?" The man swallowed hard. "If Harlan touched this," he said, gesturing to the items, "then he'll send him where no one can reach." Lenora's stomach dropped. "Where?" The man hesitated, then spoke like it hurt. "There's a house," he said. "Not a plantation, not a jail. A place respectable men go when they want to do unrespectable things without witnesses." Lenora's skin crawled. "What kind of things?" she asked, voice tight. The man's gaze flicked away. "Power," he said. "Humiliation. Ownership. Dressed as leisure. And because that man is remarkable, they treat him like a prize." Lenora's hands clenched, fury and nausea twisting together. "And you know this," she whispered. "And you let it exist." The man's face twisted in shame. "We've tried," he said hoarsely. "We've tried to expose it, to ruin them. But every time someone speaks, their tongue becomes a rope." Lenora swallowed hard. "Then we speak louder." The man stared at her. "You don't understand," he whispered. "They will ruin you." Lenora's voice was low. "They already did," she said, thinking of her husband's grave, his apology. "Now, I return the favor." The man's eyes searched her face, measuring whether she meant it. Then he nodded once, grim. "There's a courthouse clerk," he said, "a man who owes me. He can pull birth records. He can find where the papers were altered." Lenora's heart pounded. "Do it." The man hesitated. "And if we prove he was born free, that still doesn't remove the men holding him," he warned. Lenora's voice shook with fury. "Then we remove the men." The man exhaled. "You sound like him," he murmured. Lenora's throat tightened. "You know him." The man nodded. Eyes shadowed. I met him once, he said quietly. Years ago. They brought him to a parlor where I was printing invitations for a judge's party. He carried a tray. He smiled like a saint. And when no one watched, he looked at me with eyes that said, I see you seeing me. Lenora swallowed hard. What did he do? The man's mouth tightened. Nothing, he whispered. That's what terrified me. He didn't beg. He didn't threaten. He just waited. Lenora's hands clenched. Waited for what? The man looked at her, voice barely audible. For someone to finally choose truth over comfort, he said. That night, Lenora did not sleep in Savannah either. She sat in a small back room above the print shop, listening to the city noises, drunk laughter, distant shouts, river sounds. In the early hours, the clerk arrived. Nervous, sweating, eyes darting. He laid papers on the table with trembling hands, birth records, old and stained, one entry rewritten, ink, darker, over a faded line. The clerk swallowed. This is dangerous, he whispered. Lenora leaned in, scanning the words. Male child. Mother. Not listed. Father. Not listed. Status. Free. Then, in a different hand, added later, conveyed. Property. Lenora's breath caught. Her hands shook. The clerk whispered, someone with authority altered it. Someone with access. Lenora's jaw tightened. Names. The clerk flinched. The printer leaned forward, voice low. Tell her, he said. Or she'll find out anyway. The clerk swallowed hard. Judge Mercer, he whispered. Sheriff Harlan. Reverend Pike. And, his voice cracked, Mr. Calloway. Lenora froze. My husband. The clerk's eyes darted to hers. His name is on the authorization, he whispered. Maybe he didn't write it, but... Lenora's chest tightened with pain. She thought of her husband's letter, his apology, his failure. He had been part of it. Even if he regretted it, even if he tried to undo it later. Truth didn't care about intentions. It only cared about consequences. Lenora's voice came out rough. Where's Jonah being held? The clerk swallowed. The Mercer house, he whispered. Not Judge Mercer's main home. The river property. They call it a retreat. Lenora's stomach turned. The printer's eyes narrowed. Tonight, he said softly, they're hosting. Lenora's blood went cold. How do you know? The clerk's hands trembled. I saw the invitations, he whispered, and I saw his name, Jonah, listed as attendant. Lenora's vision blurred with fury. Then from downstairs, a sound floated up through the thin walls. A violin. Low, steady, beautiful. Lenora's breath caught. She looked at the printer. His face went pale. No, he whispered. The violin phrase shifted into that same unsettling pattern Lenora had heard at Calloway House, a melody that sounded like a door unlocking. The clerk's eyes went wide, panicked. What is that? He whispered. The printer swallowed hard. It's him, he murmured. He's close. Lenora's heart slammed. The violin stopped. Then came a soft knock at the back door. 3 taps. Pause. 2 taps. The printer's hands shook as he stood, moving like someone afraid of what he wanted to see. He opened the door. Jonah stepped inside. He looked the same. Beautiful in a way that made the air feel charged. But there was a new mark on his cheekbone, faint like someone had tried to remind him who held power. Not bloody, not dramatic, just enough to be seen, enough to be a message. Lenora's throat tightened. Jonah's eyes met hers, calm. He nodded once, as if arriving exactly on schedule. I told you to go to Savannah, he said quietly. Lenora's voice shook. They took you. Jonah's mouth curved slightly. They never stopped trying, he said. But they forget I've been navigating cages my whole life. The clerk stumbled back, eyes wide. How did you... Jonah looked at him, and the clerk went still like a rabbit under a hawk. I walked in, Jonah said softly, because doors open for things men want to show off. The printer whispered, You're insane to come here. They'll kill you. Jonah's gaze slid to the papers on the table. No, he said calmly. They'll try to kill the story. I'm harder to bury than ink. Lenora stood, hands trembling. We have the record, she said. We can prove. Jonah lifted a hand gently, stopping her. Paper won't save me, he said. Paper saves reputations. People save people. Lenora swallowed hard. Then tell me what you want. Jonah's eyes held hers steady. I want the men who did this to say my name out loud, he said softly. In public, in a place where their power depends on silence. Lenora's pulse pounded. A courtroom. Jonah nodded slightly. A courtroom, he said. Or a church. Or a dinner table full of their wives. The printer whispered, That's suicide. Jonah's gaze didn't flicker. No, he said. It's exposure. Lenora's throat tightened. And what happens to you after? Jonah's mouth curved, sad. That depends, he said, on whether the people who hear the truth are brave or comfortable. Lenora's hands clenched. I'll stand with you. Jonah studied her for a long moment, and Lenora felt again that sense of him deciding whether she was real. Then Jonah nodded once. Good, he said quietly, because tonight we take their retreat house. The clerk's eyes went wild. Tonight? That's... Jonah cut in calmly. They're gathered, he said. All of them. The sheriff, the judge, the preacher, the men who changed ink and called it law. Lenora's stomach turned. And their wives? Jonah's eyes flashed briefly. Some, he said. Enough, Lenora swallowed hard. How? Jonah glanced toward the violin case by the door. With a performance, he said. The printer stared. Music? Jonah's gaze sharpened. Not music, he said. A confession they don't realize they're making. He stepped closer to the table, fingers hovering over the altered birth record like it was a map. They love stories, Jonah murmured. They tell themselves stories to sleep. That I'm property, that I'm grateful, that I'm dangerous if free. Jonah looked up, eyes steady, voice low. Tonight, he said, we tell a story that makes them choke on their own names. Lenora's heart hammered. Fear and fury braided together inside her until she couldn't tell which was stronger. She thought of her husband's grave again. She thought of the boy in the portrait. She thought of the sheriff's men dragging Jonah down the road like a trophy. Lenora took a breath. Tell me what to do, she said. Jonah's gaze held hers. First, he said softly, stop thinking you're the hero. Heroes get killed in clean ways. Tonight, we survive by being ugly to the truth. Lenora swallowed hard. Fine. Jonah nodded once, satisfied. Then he opened his violin case and pulled out not only the instrument, but a bundle of folded papers tucked beneath the velvet lining. Invitations, seals, names. He laid them on the table. The printer's eyes widened. You stole these. Jonah's mouth curved. Borrowed, he corrected calmly. From Judge Mercer's desk. He keeps his sins organized. Lenora stared at the invitations. How did you get into his desk? Jonah looked at her, expression flat. Because they don't lock doors against things they don't consider human, he said. The words hit Lenora like a slap. Jonah traced a name with his finger. Reverend Pike, he said, he will pray before the meal. He will speak of righteousness. He will look at me while he says it. Jonah's finger moved. Sheriff Harlan, he said, he will laugh, he will drink, he will boast. Another name. Judge Mercer, Jonah said, he will sit at the head like a king and pretend the law is his family crest. Jonah's eyes lifted to Lenora. And you, he said softly, will arrive in black like a widow still grieving, carrying a box of memories that should have been buried. Lenora's pulse pounded. They won't let me in. Jonah's gaze sharpened. Yes, they will, he said, because you are respectable. You are a Calloway by marriage, and they will want to control what you know. Lenora swallowed hard. And you. Jonah's mouth curved slightly. I will be there already, he said. Serving. Listening. Lenora's stomach clenched. That's dangerous. Jonah's eyes flickered. Everything is dangerous, he said softly. This is simply honest. The plan unfurled fast, like a map drawn with fire. They would go to the Mercer River house at dusk. Lenora would bring the altered birth record, the portrait, the baby cap, and her husband's letter. Proof that could not be dismissed as rumor. The printer would bring copies, ink on paper, multiplied, because truth that exists in one place can be burned. Jonah would play, not for entertainment, for extraction. He would coax the men into telling their own story in front of witnesses, wives, servants, anyone with ears. And when the moment came, Lenora would force the name into the open like a knife through fabric. Elijah Calloway. Born free. Sold anyway. A slave man made beautiful so powerful people could pretend their cruelty was art. As the sun sank, they moved. The Mercer River house sat behind a gate, lanterns glowing, laughter floating on the humid air. Carriages lined the drive like a parade of respectability. Music drifted from inside, piano, polite, harmless. Lenora stepped out of her carriage in black, face calm, trunk in hand like a mourner carrying relics. A servant moved to block her. Then Sheriff Harlan appeared, smiling like he was greeting a guest. "Mrs. Calloway," he said warmly, loud enough for others to hear. "What a surprise. I didn't expect you to join us." Lenora held his gaze. "I didn't expect you to be here," she said, smooth. "I thought you were busy protecting the county." Harlan's smile tightened. "We all have duties," he murmured. Behind him, Reverend Pike's voice boomed from the parlor, practicing a blessing, laughing with men who liked to be absolved. Harlan leaned closer, voice dropping. "You should go home," he hissed softly. "This isn't your world." Lenora's mouth curved faintly. "It became my world when you walked into my house," she murmured back. Harlan's eyes flashed. For a second, Lenora saw the animal beneath the badge. Then he forced a smile again, stepping aside. "Of course," he said loudly. "Come in. We're all friends here." Lenora walked inside. The parlor was crowded with men in fine coats and women in silk, faces bright with wine and ease. A fire crackled though the air was warm, because comfort was not about need, it was about display. And there, near the side wall, moving quietly with a tray, was Jonah. He wore a dark coat tailored to fit him, making him look like a gentleman's shadow. His beauty pulled eyes, even when people tried not to stare. But Jonah's gaze didn't linger on them. It found Lenora instantly. He gave the slightest nod. Lenora's heart hammered. Judge Mercer sat near the hearth, wide and pleased, holding court like the room belonged to him. When he spotted Lenora, his brows lifted. "Well," Mercer boomed, "if it isn't our grieving dove, Mrs. Calloway, come sit. You've been hiding away too long." Lenora forced a polite smile and moved forward. Mercer's gaze slid to her trunk. "What's that?" Lenora's fingers tightened on the handle. "Something my husband left me," she said. Mercer's smile didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. "Ah," he murmured. "He was always a man of secrets." Sheriff Harlan chuckled. Reverend Pike approached, face shining with false warmth. "Mrs. Calloway," Pike said, taking her hand as if blessing her. "We've prayed for you. Grief is a trial." Lenora held his gaze. "Some trials are manufactured," she said softly. Pike's smile faltered for a heartbeat. Then Jonah's violin lifted. The room quieted as he began to play, smooth, beautiful, the kind of music that made women sigh and men feel refined for listening. Lenora watched faces soften, watched shoulders loosen, watched the room become careless. That was the trap. Comfort. Jonah played like he was stroking the room's pride. Then, subtle, patient, he shifted the melody. Not enough for most to notice. Enough to tug at the edges of memory. Sheriff Harlan's smile tightened. Judge Mercer's fingers paused on his glass. Reverend Pike swallowed hard. Jonah's bow moved with effortless control, pulling a thread that only certain men could feel. Lenora stepped forward, trunk still in hand. Judge Mercer waved. "Put that down, dear. Have wine." You look like you're carrying a coffin. Lenora's voice was steady. In a way, she said, I am. Mercer laughed, indulgent. Widows and their drama. Lenora set the trunk down in the center of the parlor. The room's laughter thinned. Jonah's music continued. Beautiful, relentless. Lenora opened the trunk slowly, like unveiling a gift. She pulled out the portrait first. A small boy's face, tenderly painted. Women leaned in, curious. Oh, one cooed. How sweet. Lenora's fingers didn't shake as she set it on the table. Then she lifted the baby cap. The stitched initials caught firelight. E.C. A hush began to form, unnoticed at first. Lenora pulled out the altered birth record next, the inked lie visible to anyone who looked closely. Judge Mercer's smile froze. Sheriff Harlan's jaw clenched. Reverend Pike's face tightened. Jonah's violin climbed into a higher phrase, the kind that made nerves sing. Lenora lifted her husband's letter last, holding it like a verdict. My husband wrote this, Lenora said, voice clear. Judge Mercer stood abruptly. Now! Lenora's gaze locked on him. He wrote it to me, she continued louder, because he knew he would not live long enough to tell the truth himself. A murmur rippled through the room. Women exchanged glances. Men shifted, uneasy. Reverend Pike forced a laugh. Mrs. Calloway, grief... Lenora cut him off. Grief does not forge records, she said. Grief does not sell children. The room went still. Sheriff Harlan's voice rose, sharp. Lenora, stop! Lenora turned to him slowly. Sheriff, she said, do you still dream about the river? The words hit the room like a thrown stone. People stared. Harlan's face drained of color. Jonah's violin stopped. Silence snapped into place, so clean it felt violent. Lenora lifted the portrait. This boy, she said, voice steady, was born free. She held up the altered record. This paper says so. She lifted the baby cap. These initials belong to a child my husband's family claimed died. Lenora's gaze swept the room, landing on Judge Mercer, on Reverend Pike, on Sheriff Harlan. And yet, Lenora said, voice rising, that boy was sold. A woman near the fireplace whispered, sold, but... Lenora's eyes flashed. Yes, she said, sold, conveyed, erased, because powerful men decided the truth was inconvenient. Judge Mercer stepped forward, face red. This is madness, he roared. Remove her! No one moved. Because too many eyes were watching now. Too many wives. Too many servants hovering at the edges. Too many people who liked gossip more than they liked obedience. Reverend Pike's voice shook. Mrs. Calloway, you're making a scene. Lenora turned to him, eyes hard. You preach righteousness, she said. Do you want to preach it now, Reverend? Or only when the sinner is powerless? Pike's mouth opened, then closed. Sheriff Harlan stepped forward, face twisted. You don't know what you're doing, he hissed. You'll ruin yourself. Lenora's voice was low. I'd rather ruin myself than protect you, she said. Harlan's hand twitched near his belt. Then Jonah stepped forward from the wall, tray gone, posture calm. He faced the room. His beauty drew every eye like gravity. My name, Jonah said, voice clear, is Elijah Calloway. A gasp tore through the women, like wind through curtains. Judge Mercer's face contorted. Lies! Jonah's gaze stayed steady. Born free, he continued. Sold anyway. Lenora lifted the record. Proof, she said. Reverend Pike's face went pale. This is... Jonah's voice cut like silk tearing. Say it, Reverend, he said softly. Say my name like you've said it before, in rooms where you thought no one would repeat you. Pike's lips trembled. Judge Mercer lunged toward Jonah. Before he could reach him, a woman's voice rang out, sharp, furious. Judge Mercer's wife. Is it true? She demanded, eyes blazing. Did you sell a child? Mercer froze. Sheriff Harlan's gaze darted, calculating. The room teetered, and then at the edge, one of the servants, an older black woman with a rigid spine, stepped forward, voice shaking with decades. I remember that boy, she said loud enough. I remember them taking him. I remember Mistress Calloway screaming behind closed doors. Agatha, who had been dragged along by fear and curiosity, stood near the doorway, face ashen. The older woman's eyes burned into her. "And you," she said, voice trembling with rage. "You watched." Agatha's mouth opened. No sound came out. The room erupted into chaos. Questions, accusations, women crying out, men shouting over each other. In the middle of it, Jonah stood still, calm, as if the noise was merely weather. Lenora felt dizzy. Her heart pounded. Sheriff Harlan's voice rose above the din, sharp and commanding. "Enough!" he roared. "This is slander. Arrest them!" He signaled his men at the door. 2 deputies pushed into the room, but the crowd, respectable, rich, curious, did not part the way it was supposed to. They hesitated, eyes darting to Judge Mercer's wife, to other wives, to the scandal blooming like fire, because arresting a widow in a parlor full of witnesses was not the same as taking a man from a back corridor. Harlan's authority wavered. Jonah leaned toward Lenora, voice low, urgent. "Now," he murmured. Lenora's pulse spiked. "What?" Jonah's eyes flashed toward the window. Outside, Moses waited with the carriage at the edge of the drive as planned. Lenora understood. This wasn't about winning in one night. It was about surviving long enough for the truth to spread. The printer, who had slipped in unnoticed, ink under his nails, moved toward the door, clutching copies hidden under his coat. Lenora grabbed the trunk's contents, letter, record, shoving them back inside. Jonah's hand brushed hers briefly, steadying. Then Jonah did something that made Lenora's breath catch. He lifted his violin again. He played one sharp, piercing note. It cut through the shouting like a knife. Everyone flinched. Then he played a second note, lower, a pattern. The room's chaos stuttered, as if the sound pulled people's attention like strings. Jonah's gaze locked on Sheriff Harlan, and Jonah smiled. Small, cold. "Tell them," Jonah said, voice carrying over the violin's fading echo. "Why you put a ring on my throat?" Harlan froze. The room turned toward him. Judge Mercer's wife stared, horrified. "A ring?" she whispered. Lenora's stomach dropped. That faint scar, like a collar mark, suddenly made 6 sense. Harlan's face went red, then pale. Reverend Pike swallowed hard, eyes darting like a trapped animal. The older servant woman's voice shook. "What did you do to him?" she demanded. Harlan's mouth opened, and for a heartbeat, Lenora thought he might actually speak, might confess under the weight of so many eyes. Instead, Harlan's face twisted with rage. He lunged toward Jonah. Jonah stepped back, graceful, letting Harlan's momentum expose him. Lenora saw it instantly. Jonah wasn't just surviving. He was orchestrating. Harlan stumbled forward into the center of the parlor, hands out like claws, and in that moment, he looked exactly like what he was. Violent, unmasked. Women screamed, men shouted. Judge Mercer's wife recoiled. And in the confusion, Lenora moved. She grabbed Jonah's sleeve. "Go!" she hissed. Jonah's gaze met hers steady. "You first," he murmured. Lenora's throat tightened. "No," Jonah's voice dropped, fierce. "They'll kill you quieter than they kill me," he said, "because your death can be called an accident. Mine can't." Lenora's breath hitched. Jonah shoved the trunk toward her. "Run," he ordered softly. Lenora's heart screamed no, but her mind understood the brutal logic. She turned, pushing through the crowd toward the door. The printer slipped out behind her. Moses was already moving, eyes sharp, carriage ready. Lenora jumped in, hands trembling, trunk beside her. The printer climbed in. Moses snapped the reins, and the carriage surged forward. Lenora looked back through the window. Inside the Mercer house, chaos swirled. And in the center of it, Jonah stood, beautiful, calm, facing Sheriff Harlan, like a mirror held too close. Lenora's breath hitched. Jonah lifted his violin one last time. Not to play, to hold it like a declaration. Then the door slammed as the carriage pulled away, and Lenora realized with a sick twist in her gut, Jonah had let her escape with the proof. And he had stayed behind as the living spark, because if they tried to silence him now, it would only prove him right. Savannah swallowed them in darkness. By morning, rumors had already outrun the carriage. The The printer's copies appeared like ghosts. On fences, under doors, passed hand to hand in taverns and markets. A widow accuses a judge, a sheriff exposed, a preacher implicated, a Callaway heir sold. People who had never cared about enslaved lives cared deeply about scandal. And scandal, when loud enough, became leverage. But leverage was not justice. By noon, Lenora received a polite invitation, delivered by a trembling messenger, to come to the courthouse to clarify misunderstandings. Agatha arrived, wild-eyed, hands shaking. "They'll lock you away," she whispered. "They'll say you're hysterical." Lenora's jaw tightened. "Then I'll speak before they can," she said. Agatha grabbed her arm. "Where is he?" she whispered, voice breaking. "Where is Elijah?" Lenora swallowed hard. "I don't know," she said, "but I know what they'll do if they still have him." Agatha's face crumpled for a heartbeat, something like regret flickering through decades of denial. Then her expression hardened again, survival returning like armor. "You can't win," Agatha whispered. "Not against men like that." Lenora's eyes flashed. "I don't have to win," she said. "I only have to make sure they can't pretend this never happened." At the courthouse, the air was thick with people. Men stood in clusters, whispering. Women leaned together like birds. Enslaved people lingered at the edges, eyes lowered but ears open, because truth traveled through kitchens faster than through courts. Sheriff Harlan stood on the steps, face rigid, smile forced. Judge Mercer stood beside him, booming calm. Reverend Pike hovered, pale, hands shaking slightly as he clutched his Bible like a shield. Lenora walked up the steps in black, carrying the trunk like a coffin. Every eye followed her. She saw pity, curiosity, hunger, and beneath it fear, because she had disrupted the story they all lived inside. Judge Mercer raised his hands. "Mrs. Callaway," he called warmly, voice loud, "this is an unfortunate misunderstanding. We'll settle this quietly." Lenora's mouth curved faintly. "Quietly is how you did it the first time," she said, voice clear. A murmur rippled. Harlan's jaw clenched. Lenora opened the trunk and lifted the portrait for all to see. "This boy," she said, voice steady, "was Elijah Callaway." Gasps. Agatha flinched behind her, face pale. Lenora lifted the altered record. "Born free," she said. "Sold anyway." Judge Mercer's smile tightened. "Forgery," he snapped. Lenora lifted her husband's letter. "Confession," she said. Reverend Pike swallowed hard. Harlan's hand twitched near his belt. Then from the crowd, a voice rang out, sharp, furious. Judge Mercer's wife, eyes blazing, stepping forward in public, something unheard of. "Is it true?" she demanded, voice shaking with rage. "Answer!" Mercer froze, caught between authority and the woman who knew his bed. People leaned in. The courthouse felt suddenly too small for the truth swelling inside it. Lenora's voice cut through. "Where is he?" she demanded, turning toward Harlan. "Where is Elijah Callaway?" Harlan's smile cracked. "I don't know," he snapped. Lenora's eyes narrowed. "Liar." Harlan's face reddened. "He's property." A roar rose from the crowd. Not agreement, but shock, because he had said the quiet part too loud. Lenora stepped closer, voice low but carrying. "Say his name," she demanded. Harlan's jaw clenched. Lenora lifted the record again. "Say it," she said, "in front of all these witnesses." Harlan's eyes flickered. Fear, calculation. If he refused, suspicion grew. If he said it, the lie cracked. Reverend Pike's lips trembled like he wanted to pray himself invisible. Judge Mercer's wife stared, furious. The crowd held its breath. Harlan's mouth tightened. Then, through the hush, a sound rose from somewhere behind the courthouse. A violin. One note, then another. The same unsettling pattern. Lenora's breath caught, heads turned, people murmured. The violin grew louder, closer, as if moving through the crowd like a knife through cloth. Lenora's heart hammered. Then Jonah appeared at the edge of the square, alive, bruised lightly, coat torn but upright, beautiful in a way that now looked less like a gift and more like a weapon he'd reclaimed. The crowd gasped. Harlan's face went white. Judge Mercer's mouth opened, stunned. Reverend Pike staggered back as if the devil had walked into daylight. Jonah walked forward slowly, violin under his chin, bow moving with calm precision. People parted without meaning to. He played as he walked, beautiful, steady, irresistible. Then right at the steps, Jonah stopped playing. Silence slammed down. Jonah lifted his gaze to the sheriff. "My name," Jonah said, voice clear, "is Elijah Calloway." The crowd erupted. Gasps, whispers, shouts. Harlan's face twisted with rage. "Seize him!" he roared. Deputies moved. But the crowd surged, not to protect Jonah out of goodness, out of hunger for spectacle, for scandal, for the thrill of seeing powerful men stumble. Women screamed. Men shouted. People pressed in. And in that chaos, Jonah stepped closer to Lenora, voice low. "They tried to move me," he murmured. "I moved faster." Lenora's throat tightened. "How?" Jonah's eyes flickered. "A key," he said softly. "They left a door unlocked because they thought beauty makes a man obedient." Lenora's breath hitched. Jonah's gaze sharpened as he looked at Harlan, then Judge Mercer, then Reverend Pike. "Now," Jonah said quietly, "they have to choose. Kill me in front of witnesses, or let the truth live." Lenora's hands shook. Harlan's voice rose, desperate. "He's lying. He's dangerous." Jonah's mouth curved faintly. "Yes," he said calmly. "I'm dangerous to liars." Lenora lifted the record again, voice shaking but loud. "This is proof," she said. "And if any of you try to silence him, if any of you try to silence me, then you will be proving every word." Judge Mercer's wife stepped forward, eyes blazing. "Tell me," she demanded of her husband. "Did you sell him?" Mercer's face contorted. He tried to speak, but the crowd's noise swallowed him. Reverend Pike's hands trembled on his Bible. Harlan's eyes darted, calculating escape routes. And in that moment, Lenora understood the ugliest, truest part of Jonah's plan. He wasn't relying on mercy. He was relying on vanity. Men like Harlan and Mercer could survive cruelty. They could not survive humiliation. Jonah's beauty, the thing that had been used to turn him into a luxury, was now being used as a spotlight. It made everyone look. It made everyone remember. It made silence impossible. The courthouse square boiled with noise, and in the center, Jonah leaned toward Lenora, voice low, almost gentle. "This is the dark secret," he whispered. "Not that I'm a Calloway." Lenora swallowed, eyes burning. "Then what?" Jonah's gaze held hers steady. "The dark secret," he said softly, "is that they made me beautiful so they could pretend what they were doing wasn't monstrous." Lenora's throat tightened. Jonah's voice didn't waver. "They dressed cruelty in silk," he murmured, "and called it taste." Lenora's hands shook with rage. Jonah looked back to the crowd, voice rising just enough to carry. "But I am human," he said, "and I remember." The words hit like thunder. A hush rolled outward, then shattered into a roar. Not justice yet, but something had cracked. Something had been dragged into daylight. Sheriff Harlan backed up a step, eyes wild. Judge Mercer's wife slapped her husband across the face. Sharp, loud. Reverend Pike stumbled. Lips moving in prayer no one believed. And the crowd, hungry and horrified, surged with a new kind of energy. One that did not know where it would land. Only that it would not go back to sleep easily. Lenora stood beside Jonah. Black dress like a banner, trunk open like a grave turned inside out. She knew the men would still try to twist the law. She knew paper didn't guarantee freedom. She knew violence could still come. Quiet and accidental. But she also knew something else now. Something Jonah had been waiting for someone to understand. Truth didn't need permission. It only needed witnesses, and Georgia had just become full of them.